So if you're hearing noise in the background, I think maybe our neighbor might be mowing at the time of this recording.
No, he is mowing.
Yeah,
for sure.
we chose the best
He's completing
time.
his life, Joel.
Yes,
he's completing his life, okay?
there's
Let
like-
the man cut his lawn.
There's like wind and mowing sounds and all sorts of stuff.
So there was a thing that came up
There's
for
a
me.
bigger mower now. Started
Oh,
here in the
good.
background.
The big mower came out, the John Deere. Well, we'll just shout over it. This is one of the most significant, beautiful episodes we've ever done.
The big mower in the
With
background.
a big mower in the background. So
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
and I'm Antonia Dodge.
And this week on the show, we have a special guest, Jonathan Hardin, who works with us. Welcome, Jonathan, by the way.
Thank you very much. I am welcome.
Yeah, happy to have you here. Jonathan works with us in our Personality Life Path Mentorship Program. He works as one of our facilitators and guides in that program. And you're in town this weekend for one of the events that we were ending one of the programs with. And we thought, you know what? Let's get you on the podcast. Let's bring you over and let's have some conversation about some things going on in your life. So just to start us out, what are your best fit type preferences?
ENFJ.
ENFJ. And just give us like a quick snapshot of your life. Like, how would you describe your life situation you find yourself in?
My quick snapshot.
If you can do that as quick as you could.
Right now, I'm here, and I'll share like how
Are you married?
how I know you guys.
Do you have
Yes,
children?
absolutely. Yes.
Do you?
I am married. I have children, 3 wonderful children, and I do talk to them about type.
Okay.
I have some thoughts on that, like how I introduced the kids to type. And I work as a hospice nurse. I've worked as a nurse for about 14 years. My wife and I run a summer camp. She operates as the camp nurse. I'm her assistant, and I kind of do like lifeguarding or ropes course or whatever is needed. And we live on an animal camp, so there's like 350 animals always around us and our kids. And we made all that decision. It's been a long time, but like we lived a very traditional life for a while, and then we had a couple things happen, and we decided we're just going to get an RV and just travel and see where the wind takes us. And we ended up living on a summer camp, like
Yeah.
kind of like in a commune or a community, and it's allowed us to travel a little bit more, which is good for our family.
Yeah.
That's one of our values, is being able to explore the world. And I think like kind of like linking into you guys, I'd been listening to the podcast since 2014.
Wow.
And found, I want to share this because I think this is interesting. One day my wife and I got into an argument, and it was mostly about me dragging her into social situations and expecting her to operate at the same level of intensity that I do.
What's your specific type preferences?
INTP.
INTP.
So yeah, ENFJ, married an INTP. And you can,
Oh boy.
if you know anything about type, you're clearly seeing that I was like expecting, like, this is just the way you do encounters with social events and everything. This is how you meet needs. And it was not working for her. And so she sent me a meme real quick about how extroverts are reaching into the bubble of introversion, trying to grab them and yank them into the outer world. And it was a funny meme, but it led me to realize I don't know anything about introvert or extrovert. And so I did a quick Google search, and within 3 clicks found your beautiful faces.
Oh.
And fell in love with you and binged all your content. And how that links into being a hospice nurse is I spent a lot of windshield time on the road, going from house to house. And so I had like 2-hour stretches where I had nothing to do. And so I would just listen to your podcast. And that's how I felt like I got to know y'all.
Yeah. So you would, on your way to going to hospice, you're
Yeah.
processing what you've been experiencing, and here we're coming along for the ride. So it's
Yes.
that
You were
time
the
period of your life.
Yeah, you were the second people in my car.
There you go.
Maybe that's the way you should think of it.
third
As
third
opposed
microphone.
to the third person out in a
Yes.
microphone.
No, you were in my car.
Yeah.
Because I would pause and argue with you and then unpause and be like, oh, wait, okay, no, Antonia fixed it. Yeah. That makes sense.
That's funny.
Yeah. And then you joined our profiler training program, and we got
Yeah.
to know you through that, and
Yeah.
became friends. And now you're working with us in some of the guide and facilitator
Yes.
capacity.
Yes, we are friends.
Which is great.
Yeah. We've got
s-
some ambient noise, I can tell.
Yeah, so if you're listening and you're not watching on YouTube, we decided to record again outside. It's nice weather these days, so we like to do recording outside. So you're gonna hear some wind because we came out, we had it all set up. we're doing this because you got to go back to Missouri
Mhm.
today,
Yeah.
Jonathan. And so we're like, we're going to record this morning, and we're outdoors and there is some wind.
Yeah.
So that's what you're hearing in the
Yeah.
background.
So one of the reasons why I'm so eager to interview you, wind and all, is, we say this quickly. Yeah, and I've been a hospice nurse for 14 years. But when you told me that, the implications of what it means to be a hospice nurse for well over a decade, for almost a decade and a half, that struck me. And I'm like, that person has some very interesting stories.
Yeah.
And not just stories about what you've seen and experienced, but what you've had to go through as a person who's, helping people conclude this experience. So would you be willing to talk a little bit about what exactly does it mean to be a hospice nurse? What are your responsibilities?
Yeah. So this is not an educational piece, but I think it should be said, what is hospice?
Mhm.
So if hospice care is a service that meets the need of the dying and their loved ones. And currently right now in our country, it's paid for by Medicare. So if you have Medicaid or Medicare, a lot of times that'll get paid for. And hospice is really just about the dying experience that you want to have as an individual, whether that be in your home or the nursing home that you call your home or the long-term care center, wherever you call home. That is where the hospice team comes together and meets your needs and your family's needs while you transcend from this life to the next life.
Yeah.
And have that dying experience.
So I always assume you have to be terminal. Like you've got to have something really wrong with you to have hospice. You got to have cancer, something really terrible, a terminal illness, and you're in a lot of pain. Like that's when I have the image of hospice in my mind. That's what I think of.
Yeah, I think of like pain management.
Yeah, but when you describe it, I'm like, I want to die that way.
Yes, yeah.
I want everybody to die that way. That sounds amazing to have like caretaking on the way out. Like,
yes, I've said many times before, if you were born into this world without help, then you may die without help. But most of us had some kind of help entering this world. We're going to need that same kind of care as we leave this world.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. Most of it is just because of the nature of death. It's usually a hard stop in our existence here, which usually includes cancer or dementia, or Alzheimer's, any kind of like diagnosis. And that's true. Like Medicare will pay for it if there has to be certain criteria that's met, and for ethical reasons as well. And of course, that's always changing and up for, I don't know exactly what the up-to-date thing is, but mostly you have to have some kind of terminal illness in order for a doctor to sign off and pay for the care for someone showing up. But hospice in its spirit is something that was done a long time ago, long before there was Medicare dollars, in that there are some fundamental things that we need at the end of life, whether that be through old age, you're 102 and you're just concluding your life, or it's, something tragic like cancer.
Yeah.
What are those things? What are the things we all need at the end of life?
So I remember this one house we were in, and the man had a terminal diagnosis, and he had already passed through a couple stages and lost consciousness and was effectively dying. And I told the family, I said, I'm thinking probably, I want to say 48 to 24 hours. And there are markers you look for that help the family prepare. We're not talking weeks, we're talking days, we're talking hours. And then this was very early in my hospice career, and 48 hours passed and 72 hours, and he still hasn't passed on. And the family began to question, like, Jonathan, what's going on? And I began to look at him. I thought, what does he need? And of course, I have lots of resources that I can gather. And I thought, you know what, let's give him a bath. He hasn't had a bath in a couple of days. So I called in one of our aides, and she did this beautiful, like, ceremonial bath, just played some music in the background, anointed him with like lavender oil, put him in his favorite outfit. That was a big piece. Like, I asked the wife, like, what's the best thing he loved to wear? What's his favorite pajamas? We put that on him, and he died.
Wow.
And I remember that story because it led me to talk to all of my caregivers and remind them that the first memories of your life, you were born from your mother and immediately were placed in the hands of a nurse who cleansed you with water. It's one of our first somatic memories we have. And it makes sense that our life would be bookended by having that bath, that cleansing of the water before we pass.
Mhm.
And so that is one of the needs, is cleanliness. And that might sound kind of like superficial, but being clean and dignified is a need that we have at the end of life.
Mhm.
Another need you might think like, and this is a very hard need to let go of, but sustenance, food, water, it no longer becomes a need. And that's I believe it or not, I think I've seen families struggle more so with not feeding their loved one than the actual death experience, the pain of not being able to feed. And I think that's because I don't care what culture you come from. And I've seen so many houses, everyone spells love FOOD.
Mm.
I mean, that's how we express love. We feed our loved ones. And so to tell them like, oh, their body doesn't need this at the end of life. And actually it can be kind of dangerous because you put food in the body and it's not digesting properly. It can hurt.
Yeah.
So telling the loved one, you have to love them you have to love the dying in a different way, because food is not going to help at this time.
Mhm.
So food doesn't become a need, but a lot of times I say replace food with touch.
Yeah.
Gently placing your hand on their hand and reminding them, I'm here with you.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, it would make sense that the needs of someone would change the end of their life around like food, digestion, things of this nature.
Yeah, because it's a physical process. This is amazing too, because it can be so painful not to feed or give water to someone. I mean, you think about like any traumatic situation.
Yeah.
One of the first things we do is we put a blanket over them and give them something warm to drink. It's an instinct we have. So when your loved one is going through a dying process, your instinct is to hydrate them.
Mhm.
And I think this is such a merciful design in our bodies. And this is absolutely true. At the end of life, especially like with Alzheimer's, dementia, and at the end of life with anyone, all of your thirst receptors gently turn off. You no longer feel thirst.
Wow.
Since your body doesn't need it, there's no desire for it. You're transcending that desire that you would have with like hunger or thirst. So, and that I've watched people like instantly sob because they realize, oh, they're not suffering.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like they're lying there, in the final stages of their life, but they're not thirsty.
Mhm.
And so they start to reframe and understand, me meeting my father's need at this moment is not giving him his favorite beverage. It's got to be something else. So we can gently redirect the love into other things like touch, gentle touch, recreating the environment to be familiar and comfortable. And also to a lot of like giving permission for the loved one to pass on.
Yeah, I bet people hang on longer because they don't want to leave their loved ones in the lurch. Like they feel
Yes.
like,
Responsible.
yeah,
Oh,
they
yeah.
know that there's
Oh.
going to be grief and suffering coming
Yes.
for their loved ones, so they'll hang on to delay that.
I think in my mind, I see it as like these tethers that we're attached to. And like, if I'm dying, I'm attached to the biggest attachment, my wife,
Mhm.
and then my children, and then possibly my children's children. And so, I mean, when I first went into hospice, I thought death was some kind of chaos machine. Like I thought it was chaotic and it was unpredictable and even rude. And I have learned that death is incredibly polite. In that I have watched people get exactly what they want at the end of life. And traumatic deaths aside, when someone's dying in natural causes, even if it is a terminal illness, they're getting to decide. It's almost like, do they get to connect or reconnect or disconnect from the person? Do they have that permission? Then they die. Or they might wait. I mean, I have a couple of stories of like people in the dying process, but then I would ask the family, like, is there anyone else that hasn't said goodbye? There's been one situation. I remember this guy had he had an ex-wife that still lived in town. And they're like, well, he was with her for like 20 years. We had her come over and say her piece. Say, you have permission to go. And I can almost see that tether just gently release and allow him to transcend from this life. And even more funny stories, like I remember this guy, it was just him and his wife living out in the country. And she said goodbye. She said, "You can go now," Harold or whatever his name was, like, "You can leave." Like, she was very directive, and he was not passing on. He was not dying. He was completely, in the unconscious stages, lying there, no food, no water, just a heartbeat. And I asked the wife, I was like, what would be annoying him right now if he was here?
Mm.
And she said, well, the grass is like 3 feet tall outside. I said, get the neighbor to cut the grass. The day that the grass was cut, he died.
Wow.
And I remember that was one of my first experiences, and it led me to believe we have these tethers that are attached to things we value.
Yeah.
Precious things that are here on this planet. And if we are dying from natural causes, those have to be resolved.
Like responsibilities we haven't let go of.
Yes.
Like the grass was still his
Yes, it
responsibility.
was. Yes, absolutely.
The theme that's coming up for me, the word complete or completion keeps coming up for me. Like
Yeah.
there's a desire or a sense of wanting something to feel complete.
Yeah.
And like closed out and finished well before you want to pass.
Absolutely.
It feels like that's the energy that's in that space.
Mm.
And it's unique as every person. I mean, if you're interested in book reading, there's a small pamphlet written by Barbara Carnes, registered nurse. And that was the first book that I read. And it's a very small book. I mean, it's like maybe 25 pages, but she reframes death as gone from my sight. That's the title of the book, Gone from My Sight. And it's not, she says, it's not that they're dying. It's that they're just gone from your sight.
Mm.
They're moving beyond your ability to witness them.
Mhm.
And so our job as hospice nurses, as the hospice team, and even as the family in some regards, is to see them off well.
Yeah.
And that might be the spouse placing their hand on the dying's hand and saying, "It's okay. I'm going to be fine."
Mm.
Or it might be, "I forgive you." It might be setting up the physical environment to see someone off as if they're leaving on a long trip, or even taking care of something mundane as the grass getting cut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the role of a hospice worker, nurse? I'm guessing the family's a huge part of this.
Yeah. Big time.
I think if you just think about it in general, it's, you're going to be with the person that's dying. That's not, but you have to remember there's a whole ecosystem around them. There's children, there's probably
Yes.
a partner, potentially a partner,
Mhm.
other family members or friends that probably all have their roles they're trying to play. And by the time somebody gets sick, I'm guessing that by the time hospice gets there, maybe a spouse or a family members, they might be exhausted from caretaking themselves. And so you probably,
Yes.
I don't know if are you like an intruder in that space, or is it a welcome
Welcome,
relief?
friend.
Yeah. How do people
Yeah.
respond to when you enter the scene? A hospice team enters the scene.
And it is so dynamic
Mhm.
because you're dealing with myths of hospice. You're dealing with people's ideas and experiences. You're dealing with everything that led up to when I knock on the door and introduce myself. And I want to say something that I think is very important to honor. When I would knock on the door and introduce myself, the first thing I would say is, why hospice now? Why?
Mhm.
What do you need?
Right.
Because I think it can be very threatening to someone who has been spending the last 9 months battling a terminal illness and doctor's visits and dealing with crazy family dynamics and caregiver swap. Like a lot of times the spouse will become the caregiver,
Yeah.
or the son will have to fly in and leave his job and his life to take care of his dad. There's a lot of dynamics going on. So I'm very sensitive and attuned to understanding that me walking in is not the beginning of the story.
Mhm.
I'm entering into the symphony midstream. And so there's a lot of like me asking the questions. And after I hear the person's story, I have a general sense of understanding what they need.
Yeah.
Do they need someone to come in and do the pain management and just handle that? Like stay out of the social dynamics, just do the pain management. Totally fine. Yeah. What's the problem? But sometimes it's caregiver fatigue. And you can see this as a clear marker, especially like with Alzheimer's dementia. The patient themselves will have the haircut, buttoned up, looking well, belts on, clean, and the caregiver is just like, like physically drained and exhausted and hasn't eaten. And it's almost like a swap. Like, wait, I thought you were the patient. And sometimes I would sit down with the caregiver. Usually it's the wife. And I would ask her to describe to me how it's been caring for your husband in this manner. And it's always mixed with like, I love him, but, or we had tough times. I can't leave him. I've 65 years of marriage. I never would, but it's killing me. Mm-hmm. And I would gently place my hand on her hand and say, okay, well, I'm firing you. You're no longer the caregiver. You're the wife. We'll do the caregiving. And you'll see this burden lift from her in the form of tears as she realizes I have been neglecting my role as a wife in order to survive taking care of my husband as a caregiver. And so hospice can be incredibly therapeutic and comforting, coming in and filling in the gaps where it's needed.
Yeah. So after doing this for so many years, I mean, this is what Antonia started off with. This has to change you as a person. This has to bring things up for you. Like, you're confronted with your mortality in general, but also you probably are reflecting on your own mortality through all of this and the people you love. Like, oh, what will my life and my wife's experience be at the end of our exit? Like, you're going through the process of this over and over again with like different people. What are some of the lessons you've pulled in your own life as an ENFJ with ENFJ preferences? Like, what are some things that have come up for you?
I think the biggest one is, I mean, if I can just go right into it, faith is a massive theme in hospice care. I don't know what it is completely about death, but it makes us be very honest about what we believe regarding spirituality and faith and the afterlife. And for that reason, I think it's the only healthcare profession where we have chaplains. I mean, there's chaplains everywhere in every field, but I mean, the chaplain plays in a 50% role as well as the hospice nurse. I mean, the hospice team is a nurse, a social worker, and a chaplain because we recognize, I mean, we're spiritual beings. And it's going to look different for everyone. And giving people permission to express their spirituality at the end of life is it's inspiring. And the way I think about it is I myself started hospice care with my faith, and it was like this core building in my life. But as I began to meet more and more people, I mean, you're talking like 9 to 10 people a day that you would meet with of all kinds of different faiths and backgrounds, I found that this one house that I had built wasn't enough to serve everyone. And so I began to go through my own spirituality and understand how can I expand my faith to not negate the core of who I am and what I was brought up believing, but how can I almost like do an addition, an add-on? And so I began to build like, oh, I can adopt this part of that faith and I can almost do like an add-on. And then I would build like a courtyard. And then over time, I realized I'd built these layers of spirituality and faith because I wanted to be able to accommodate anyone. And so if it was someone who maybe had my faith background, I could bring them to that part of my spirituality and say, oh yeah, I can accommodate that. And if it was someone that I had adopted a spirituality with, I could also accommodate them as well. So I think one of the ways hospice changed me was it helped my faith expand without letting go of that nucleus and not getting rid of it. It's just the nucleus though.
Yeah. Is there a way to die well?
Yes, absolutely.
How does one die well?
If everything's proceeding naturally as possible, I think the most important thing to understand is that it is natural. It's not something to fight. It's not an invader. It's
not a problem to solve.
Yeah, it's not a problem to solve. It's a welcome conclusion to a life. And those are the happiest deaths, are the ones where the families all gather around and say, oh no, this is great. Like, you know, mom lived a wonderful life. There's lots of legacy. There's lots to show for it. So I would say understanding it's not an unnatural process. It's as natural as birth. I think the second thing to remember is that, and I think you guys understand this to your core, there is one thing that I think every person on the planet would agree with. We are not meant to be alone.
Yeah.
We are not meant to be lonely. Dying well means, even if you're like the most introverted, quiet person and you secretly die at 3:00 in the morning while everyone's asleep because you don't want to disturb anyone or make a mistake or do it wrong, you're still surrounded by people. You're still surrounded by attendants and someone's witnessing your life. Dying well means being witnessed. There's people around you. Dying unwell would mean a sad time in which you're not surrounded by people.
The first point you made, which is part of dying well, is accepting how natural it is.
Yeah.
That this is a natural part of life. As a hospice nurse, you probably have mostly dealt with people who have lived long lives, but have you dealt with people whose lives are cut short?
Yes, absolutely.
And would you say that that's the case for them too?
Yes, because I think you said something about completion. I think that's a good word for it. I immediately thought there's this, mid-30s woman dying of a horrible cancer, and she had fiance and kids. And I remember when I walked into her room, she was, for the first time, it was messy and she had all these medical problems with her. But I had this instinct that she did not need nursing care. She needed someone to redecorate her room and open the windows and, talk to her as if she was a person. And so we became very good friends. Well, she died tragically at 36 with no legacy, like kids in the making.
Right.
But on her deathbed, her fiance married her. That was a completion moment in her life. So her fiance, her family, her pastor gave her that gift of completion. You accomplished something. So it's really not about just accomplishing the last parts of your life all the way up to like 102.
Right.
It's like, did you reach the next milestone? I think that means you died well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm going to posit something here with my intuition and my feelings, like kind of what I know about people's feelings and intuition and also what I know about personal growth. I'm going to posit something, Jonathan. I want to hear from you of how you see this. At our Personality Life Path mentorship program this weekend. So we have spent, by the time people get there, it's a 3-day event. But by the time somebody gets there, we've gone on like a 3-hour to 4-hour Zoom call every week for 8 weeks, walking through the 8 Jungian cognitive functions that we work with here in Personality Type. And we look at what that looks like in our lives, how it's represented archetypically in the world, but also it relates to our personality and our existence. And so we audit this in our lives. Everybody goes and tests these energies in their lives and they bring all their findings to this event. And then we work with people to find the systems map of their life and the next the next steps to take on their life path. And during the weekend, I gave everybody an offering to say, what are you going to be leaving behind? What burden do you feel complete with? You're not going to be taking with you on the next phase of your life when you leave this weekend. And really, there is a theme that emerges during those weekends where people have, it's almost in a lot of ways like a death and rebirth process in some of the things they're dealing with. Like they might let something go, a trauma, or they might let go the fear of success or whatever it is for them. It might be achievement, it might be healing, it might be transcendence. Everybody's got their unique thing down to their personality type because we meet them in their life. We meet students in their lives where they're at, their type, what's going on, their circumstance, their age, all the station of life. But you were there this weekend. It's extremely emotional. It's not just emotional. It's like gut-wrenchingly, like you really go through a process of metamorphosis and change. And I was wondering if there's did you notice patterns or corollary patterns of like the emotions in the room as people were letting go of things in their life and transcending things? Is there a correlation to death and dying? Does it have some similarities, I guess? Like actual dying?
Yeah, I do think so. Well, of the personality life path, I think the reason it can be so transformational is because you're setting aside time and space. And anytime you say this time is sacred, this space is sacred, it gives the work of the spirit. And death is such a spiritual process. Transcendence is a spiritual process that's what emerges. So the pattern that would be in hospice a lot of times is when you're in the hospice care, time doesn't matter as much. You're looking for moments, not minutes. I think to contrast that with like the medical world, it's very time sensitive. The IV has to be given this much over this amount of time. Doctors have to arrive at this time. Surgery has to take this much hours. The medical world is very time sensitive, whereas I think hospice transcends you to moment sensitive.
Yeah.
And then space is very important. This is my personal belief, but I think most, like Barbara Carnes, any hospice writer would agree that creating a good space for someone to die well is very important. Right down to make sure the room's clean, or really it's about making sure the room is reflective of who the person is.
Yeah.
Death is a path as unique as the person on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what you just said, that it's about making space. And that's like when you make space for something to happen, that's spiritual,
Yes.
right? Attending to. And I think we all instinctively know that death is one of those things that you have to make space for.
Yeah.
If somebody's dying, most of the time you'll give them time off to work, of work to go be with their loved one that's dying. Like, it's a universal, like, yeah, of course, take time off, right? And so it's one of those few experiences where we all understand the significance of it. So we're all collectively supporting each other when somebody in our lives is dying. And obviously, if you're the person who's in that situation, if you're the person who's dying, nobody expects, get to work until the last second, right?
Exactly.
And so that idea that just giving yourself time and space, that all by itself can be a spiritual experience, and then transformation can happen within that. That's a really interesting point. I think that's I think we don't do that enough. We do not give ourselves time and space, and when we do, it's usually because we're exhausted, and then we just use that to rest.
Yes.
But the idea of like cutting out space for ourselves to have those experiences, and the idea that it's not about minutes, it's about moments.
I like
right?
that.
I really like that too. And we have a tendency to think of time as a collection, or not time, but life as a collection of minutes, like the time we spent. But it's actually the moments we remember. It's the moments that make us feel something about ourselves, or understand something, or to be with people, to make it, a life well lived is a bunch of experiences and moments. Yeah.
If you can imagine time as a straight line, and these minutes we're just cranking out, going about our day, and then all of a sudden going on a roundabout. And during that roundabout, that's the moment. That's the space and time where the spirit arrives. What it ends up doing is by the time you get back into the minutes, you're on a different trajectory.
Yeah.
And so I think the correlation between personality life path and hospice is, that's the way I see it, is like everyone's coming into this roundabout for like a 3-day event and experiencing a moment. And it could be a time of great metamorphosis. And you see that when someone actually does transcend something, you watch the entire room showcase them, hold space for them, support them. I'm thinking like, this is just like a hospice care visual. Like, we are gathering around. There's even like everything I see. Like, there's still breaks for food and sustenance, but during those moments, we're almost transcending the need for food and water, because we're so wrapped up in that moment of just whatever that person needs. And it's really just presence, which is a big factor in hospice care and transcendence. Are we present in this moment?
Yes. Speaking of which, at the event this last weekend, you talked about honoring people.
Yeah.
And we asked what your definition of honor is. And
it's to witness someone, to witness them. And so, like, anytime someone's going through transformational anything, and you can sense that moment's happening, like at the PLP, I feel like my responsibility is to sit there and hold vigil. It's just sit there. Almost, you've imagined like I'm holding a flame inside of me, or a little candle, and I'm just witnessing this moment for this person. Because when you're transcending something, you're almost unconscious. Like you're in the dark. You're feeling your way through the darkness into the next phase of your life. And it can feel very lonely and almost out of body.
Mm-hmm.
We need those people to hold vigil for us and witness and be like, I saw you go through that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's a very precious thing too, by the way, that if you're in that space where you're watching someone transcend something, whether it be an actual death or a metamorphosis in their life, recognize that what you're witnessing is incredibly precious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it should remain special.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. There was somebody who was at the event who talked about struggling with vulnerability and had a really hard time communicating the things that they were experiencing in a group full of people. And you just nailed why, even though it can be so difficult to be vulnerable around others, why it's important to push through and get to the other side of that is when you're going through something in your life, it feels dark.
Yeah.
It feels like, how do I get through this? How do I even navigate? We can lack clarity or have foggy head or just, you're just waiting for the answers to become clear. And that concept of being witnessed and have the person be a vigil, like they themselves are a candle, right?
Yeah.
It's like people observing us, especially if they're willing to witness and honor and hold vigil, they make the path a little lighter, right?
Yeah.
Like they're a human candle through a dark place.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to be vulnerable, right, means being willing to be witnessed, right? It's being willing to have somebody be a light in a dark place for us. Yeah. And trust that they'll hold it.
Yeah. And I can think there's probably so many, now that you said it that way, there's a need for both. I mean, I don't think you actually can transcend without someone holding vigil for you.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I think about it,
yeah,
I think you will forever be stuck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's why it's so important. Like I said, the core value, like the most important thing is not to be lonely.
Mm-hmm.
You can and I say this because there are people who have waited till everyone leaves the room. I'll say, hey, everyone take a smoke break, just go get tacos. And I'm sensing this dying person is just needing to not have so much attention on them.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone leaves 3 o'clock in the morning. They die peacefully. So it's not embarrassing.
Wow.
I've seen that before, but they're still witnessed by everyone.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot transcend in loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
Someone has to hold vigil for us in order for it to truly happen.
Well, but we can die, so we can be snuffed out without, we
that's
we
true.
die alone.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. And many people have.
Yeah.
And so there's a distinction between dying and transcending.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting concept.
I think what's interesting about hospice, one of the correlations I see between that and like a personal growth workshop or mentorship, like personal life path, is the intentionality of it. I think that's what I'm attracted to with hospice too, is like I get to have intentionality to dying at the end of my life.
Yeah.
Like that's the part of it that I like. It's like it didn't, barring some accident or something that happens to you.
Right.
If you have the ability, why wouldn't anyone want to set intention to die? I mean, we pretend like it's not going to happen to us in our culture. Like, we just pretend like it's not a thing, like dying. But you mentioned it's a natural process. It's not a problem to be solved, but that's how we see it in the West, especially in the United States. It's like death is a problem to solve, but it's also an inevitability we're all going to face at some point, like everyone. And I think if that's inevitable, why not put intentionality to it? And then I think in terms of like personal growth type things, just like creating the space, just the intentionality of coming somewhere, setting time aside. You're intending to close a chapter, have a completion on one part of something, and then open a chapter of something else. And death to some people doesn't feel that way because it's passing into an unknown after this happens experience. Yeah, but it is a completion of something. So it feels like a new start is there in a way.
Right. Like I'm sitting here as somebody who's basically agnostic, right? I no longer believe that, I don't have a belief that there's something after. I hold up, I'm like, if it happens, I'm not going to be like, no. Right. So, I mean, obviously, what's that?
I was wrong.
Yeah.
I guess there was something.
All this universal organization needs to go away because I was pretty sure that this wasn't going to happen, right? I mean, obviously, I'm going to be like, oh, okay, well, I guess there's more stuff going on. But I don't have any expectation of that. and yet still that concept that I'm transcending something, right? Like, all I know is that this, whatever this thing is, it's complete, right?
Yeah.
It's the chapter is closed.
Yeah.
And so if transcending simply means like the next phase is just, I just go back to what it was before I was born. Right? Like I didn't exist then either.
Yeah.
So then I just keep not existing, right? And I
Right.
just had like a little brief blip of existence. That's fine too, but that still feels like a transcendence, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And I think that is great comfort. And I've seen people relax and rest in like, I don't have to expect anything.
Right.
I don't have to prepare.
Mhm.
I don't have to get my notes together.
Yeah.
I can just rest that I've finished my life. I close my eyes and whatever happens, happens.
Yeah.
Like that can be a great source of comfort.
So I mean, I think this is probably the most tropey question I could possibly ask, but I think it's legitimate still because we're all trying to prepare by having a good life
Mhm.
for death. I think there's two pieces, right? Preparation for death is like have a good life and then also maybe even have a death plan, whether or not you're
Yeah.
able to implement it.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking about it last night. How do you want to die? And I was like, well, I always, when I think of death in this country or in the United States, I think of like being hooked up to machines in a hospital and then flatlining. That's like how I think about
Mhm.
death.
What you see on TV.
Yeah. Well, and also how I have
Yeah.
personally experienced death. Like
That's
that's how
true.
my sister died, and that's how
Yeah.
my grandmother died, and like hooked to machines, and then it flatlined. And so, when I think about how I would like to die, I'd read about a village that at the end of somebody's life, everybody in the village comes and touches the person
Mm.
until they fall asleep. Right. Now that might be a nightmare for other people, but for me, the idea of like being basically petted,
Oh yeah.
right, until I fall asleep, it sounds pretty good to me. Like I'm like, I would like to be pet by everybody.
Yeah.
Like, can just everybody that I love come in and just touch me? I don't know if I'm going to be able to have that, right? But if I have a death plan, quote unquote, I can communicate that to my loved ones and go, if it's at the end, that's what I'd like, please. You know, pet me into the next life.
Yeah.
Which I have seen. I've seen people I mean, of course, a lot of times when I do meet someone, and there are stages of hospice, I might meet someone in very early stages of hospice where they were proactively seeking the treatment, the care. And then most often it's like mid-hospice, like mid-crisis, a hospital visit or doctor's visit. And then there's a lot that's late hospice in which you're at the final,
Right.
the 11th hour and you get called in.
So there's like different stages. You could probably figure some stuff out. But the question I was going to ask that's tropey is, what do people tend to regret?
Yeah. I mean, the first one, I'll go through the ones as they appear in my mind. But the first one is like, did I do good? Did I do a good job? And I think understanding type and type systems can greatly help with this.
Because it means something a little different for every person.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think as much as I'm able to read the person, I've been able to find out like, what are they looking for? You know, or retroactively, you know, I can ask the family questions. Tell me about your dad. Tell me about your dad, and try to be like, okay, what type is he? You know, like try to use that as a tool to figure out like, did I do right? Did I take care of my family?
Did I have a life of adventure?
Did I have a life? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say it's still unique as every person. I mean, it's that question cannot be templatized. I don't think.
That just made me think of yet another advantage to type is type helps you give yourself permission to live what you would personally define as
Success.
a success,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, did I do a good job?
Yeah.
Type is going to help you figure out what you mean, what a good job is
Yeah.
in life. And if you let it, it'll give yourself permission to go do that. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's really down to did I do a good job, because I have put my hands on a patient of mine. I've whispered in their ear, even as they're dying, I'm proud of you.
Mhm.
You did a good job. Your family is here and they are proud of you. You did a good job. And you'll watch them actually exhale.
Mhm.
And I've just concluded that that's what people are looking for.
Mhm.
Did I do a good job?
What other regrets do people have? Or is that basically it?
Yeah, I think it's basically it, and then it gets compounded into what that means.
Right.
Does it mean like did my son show up to say goodbye to me?
Right. Yeah.
Is my wife did the grass get mowed, and
Right.
my wife doesn't have to do it? Did
Yeah.
I establish a system in which my neighbor can mow the grass?
Yeah. Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
and there's, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's just really unique to the person. Like, are they a performance-based person? It's a crazy story, but we had this one guy in a total comatose. He's a pastor. And as soon as we walked in the room from the coma, he lit up, Pastor Tom, nice to meet you, and laid back down. And it was like, yeah. And I told the family, I said, well, are you surprised?
Yeah.
I was freaking out. I was like, this is what he did all his life.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like muscle memory.
Absolutely. So why would he change at the end of life?
Yeah.
Even in a coma.
Absolutely. And so many stories of like the surges or the second chances, the last meal, people just coming back and expressing, you know, what it's like to die, and then be able to share a little bit of like the in-between stages. But there's that, yeah. I mean, everyone's different in that regard, but it's really,
Yeah.
I think, maybe distilled down to, did I pass?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right before I passed, did I pass?
Yeah.
There is one thing that I wanted to something struck me, and when we were talking about it last night, we've talked about it twice. I said it the first time. The first time I said it sounded significant, and then the second time it sounded kind of almost insulting. So I want to make sure I get this right. Yeah. But there's a one of the things that came up for me is that, you know, all of us learn on our jobs, and we're all going to make mistakes.
Mm.
And as a hospice nurse, it means that I'm sure you've made mistakes. And as part of the word we used before was doula, right? Like
Yeah.
when you're a doula for life, somebody gets birthed,
Yeah.
and your position is like a doula for death,
Yes.
right? You help somebody pass into the next life. And I feel like if I had been making mistakes as a doula of death, it would help me really have to come to terms with my own it would be very difficult for me to lie to myself about things around that. You know what I mean? Like as somebody
yeah.
with ENFJ preferences,
Yeah.
you also share introverted thinking.
Yeah.
But introverted thinking or accuracy is an inferior function for you. And I'm like, well, you're such a seasoned person. I was like, why? How did Jonathan become so seasoned? When somebody's a very seasoned, mature version of their type, I always want to know the story. Like, what was the leverage point? And when I heard that you were a hospice nurse for 14 years, I went, okay, that's it.
Mm.
Right? There's so many truths that you can't squirm your way out of when it
Yeah.
comes to death. And so we've been talking about like the observations of people like living a life that allows them to, you know, to give themselves permission to conclude this experience, right? One of the things that I believe would require some radical honesty is it's like, I made a mistake, and that was the last thing that person experienced. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't want you to go over like, yeah, these are all the mistakes I
Yeah,
made,
no.
right? But I mean, like, is there like something that it was almost undeniable? Like you had to face certain truths that you couldn't squirm out of or rationalize or tell yourself it was okay.
Yeah.
That has allowed you to sort of rest into your own identity, your own capabilities. You know, it's like, it's just, does my question even make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Here's what I think. I think I learned very quickly that I'm not the one making the mistakes. It's the patient.
Mm.
There's more pressure on the person in the bed to die well than there was on me to do well.
Mm.
And I think just very quickly I decided to support that.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't the star,
Right.
so to speak.
Right.
I wasn't coming in to perform. There was more focus on the person in the bed or on the couch or on the lazy boy
Mm-hmm.
in their dying process.
Yeah.
Like they're wondering, they look foolish. Do I look foolish? I mean, I've heard that. Like, how stupid do I look? Am I
Right.
dignified? And so I think my entire job was just making sure their hair looked good, that they looked good, that they were
Mhm.
supported, that they were comforted. And only in that did I feel like I failed, when I didn't help them achieve the support they were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
that was all very private. I think like those kind of mistakes are not out in the open.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like if I drop, you know, if you have an accident in someone's home or you break a social faux pas, those are mistakes that can quickly be fixed.
Sure.
And I think that might be that introverted thinking piece, like
Mhm.
walking into a home and having no idea what is the social customs, what are the norms, and just understanding that I am going to be offensive at least for the first 15 minutes.
Right.
I mean, I
Right.
am going to be offensive for the
Yeah.
first 15 minutes. And that's just something I have to reconcile.
Right.
I cannot be all things to all people. And I have to stumble my way through thinking the right thoughts or understanding where people are coming from.
Mhm.
And so that was very much trial and error. But as far as like the actual hospice process, as soon as I got out of the way and supported them in their journey, I think then maybe I made less mistakes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I feel like the profession you chose requires you to see things head on. Like you can't squirm out of it. Like
Yeah.
it's like you are part of the reality, the truth that cannot be ignored, which is the conclusion
Yes.
of life.
It's very honest.
Yeah.
And it allows for a lot of honesty.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure you've witnessed so much honesty.
Like emotional honesty. But everyone knows that there's like a ticking time. There's a timer.
Right.
Or it's that moment, like I said, when all of a sudden you create the space and the time, people suddenly become very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I think that was also surprising, the level of vulnerability people gave to me as a stranger hospice nurse. I mean, the permission
Yeah.
you give, but you understand you have to,
Yeah.
because there's this space where you're very honest. This is what's happening. And I know that to be true because the times when people were in denial, that's when the waters are very muddy and you have to almost like play house.
Right.
Well, are you playing hide and go seek with a 3-year-old energy? Like, you know how like little kids hide in the corner and they're like, they cover their eyes and like, and you have to protect. Are you under the table? Like, is it the level of pretense and pretending because they're not confronting this, but we all know it's happening? Does it feel silly? Do you play along? Do you cut through their BS and say, no, here's the truth? And you like try to correct them and make them, do you know what I'm saying? Like when people are in denial, they can almost be childlike.
Okay. I think I know what the answer is, because no, I was never direct. I would say like my style of care was not, here's the facts, here's what's going on, here's the information, maybe like an INTP would. I never came up with that. I think maybe if introverted thinking was an energy that I used, it was more of like, I'm going to lead by being honest in my best way. And I think that actually came through me sharing a little bit of my truth, my life a little bit, like being a little bit vulnerable, because that's a very vulnerable part of me, sharing what I think.
Yeah.
And I think I actually led by example in that regard. And like letting everyone know. It's strange to think that you would lead through introverted thinking, but I probably just revealed a little bit of my thoughts and set the precedent for it's okay to say these things right now.
Wow.
And you did that because that was the need.
Yeah.
Your extroverted feeling is like, this is the need of this group. They need me to be willing to be vulnerable with sharing my thoughts. So that's what I'm going to have to do and lead by example.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 So when you say play house, you don't mean pretend that a child's hiding in the corner energy wise. I mean,
So the complication was when no one wants to be honest and everyone's in denial and we're just playing house as if everything's just routine.
I see. So everything's normal, but it's not normal.
Yeah.
And so are you saying you would have to kind of go along with, like, you come in and the spouse is like pretending almost like this person's not terminally ill? Or they're just acting as if nothing's going on and they're like, we're going to have a big dinner tonight and he's going to sit at the table. And you're like, dude, this guy's not sitting at the table. I'm sorry. But you're a delusional if you think that the person that's dying right now that's in bed is going to be able to go come and sit with the rest of the family like normal.
Where there's a bunch of core issues of the family that are obviously coming out. Yeah. Like with the tension of dying, but we still can't address them.
You know, as you talk about it, I'm actually drawing a couple of blanks because I'm thinking like that. Probably like I blacked out, I'm sure, in those moments, like when that was actually needed.
Yeah.
I feel like I probably just blacked out and did the right thing. And I'm thinking it probably was like an honest conversation, sitting down and telling the person, I think I probably asked them, what is the truth of this situation right now? What do you think is going on?
Yeah.
And I would tease that out of them rather than just directly telling them this is how it is, this is how it's going on. It was definitely a lot more teasing the truth out of them so that they can come to the truth on their own terms. Because I think that's a big part too of being a caregiver and cooperating with a caregiver, or even cooperating with someone who's in the dying process. I mean, the husband might be totally fine. He's like, I know I'm dying, and the wife is just completely in denial. But we also have to understand that is part of the grief process too.
Yeah.
That is, you can delay that denial, the bargaining, and that is grief.
Right.
And I think, again, that's still being honest.
Right.
Because I'm just being honest, like, she's in grief right now. That's the truth.
Yeah. And being able to see how many truths there are.
Yeah.
Right. In a situation like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What, before we conclude this or complete this, did you have
No.
Okay.
Wrap up.
I'm really grateful to you for being willing to talk about this experience, because I think you have an insight into something that is so human and so universal, and yet is something that we all have a tendency, particularly in this culture, to not want to look at, to push away, to like hope it never comes, and then when it happens to us and with a family member, you almost don't know what to do about it. Like, I don't really feel like we get a lot of training around death in this culture. Is there something that you want to communicate to people about this process that is counterintuitive, or maybe people don't really think about, or maybe they do, it's just good to reinforce it? Is there anything that you generally want to communicate and express to people about death?
Yeah, I would first say, definitely gratitude to you guys, because don't forget to factor in your influence in my transformation and growth and my seasoning, because I did spend a lot of time in the car listening to you. And that was incredibly, incredibly empowering to be filled up and understand who I am and how I work, so that when I go into someone's home, I can serve them the best way possible. I mean, I don't want that to fall on deaf ears. That was a big part of me, I think, arriving to this seasoning of who I am, not just being a hospice nurse, but also focusing on transformation and growth at the same time, because I think it can be a road of despair. And having this infusion of hope through your voices was transformative. So if you are listening, or a hospice nurse, or you are a hospice nurse, or someone who's spending a lot of windshield time, recommend this podcast, because you kept me from being one-sided. I think it could be very easy to be in the culture of death and have this myopic view of how it works, but also having the understanding of, well, yeah, but we're living right now. So how can we get to the next milestone? How can we grow in our journey? I think in that way, it helped me see that hospice is just one more step. Death is just one more step of the journey. That's hopeful. That helps you not be afraid. And I think removing fear to the side, love can come in and take over. Love is very much welcome once fear is addressed and taken care of. So if I was giving one thing, about hospice care, I would say, address your fears of dying and your fears of letting go, and understand that there are already little deaths along the way. From birth, we are the flower that is picked for the pleasure of life. And like the flower that is picked for life's pleasure, we are already beginning to die. So you're already on the journey. Make it count. And remember that space of welcoming is about setting aside time and space. You can start now by setting aside time and space to get out of the minutes and get into the moments.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What I just got from what you said too is, because I was going to say, well, how does one get over the fear of death? But what I just inferred from your statement is, if you spend a life of transformation, you already experience a whole bunch of little deaths. You have to give up parts of your ego. You have to be willing to die to earlier iterations of yourself. So growth and development and having frequent moments of transcendence, which require time and space, right? And to be willing to die to yourself a little at a time as you grow and mature, that's part of the preparation of the final act, of the final curtain. Yeah.
Well said.
Well said, Antonia.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, thank
That
you
was
so
beautiful.
much. This has been so insightful. I really appreciate it.
So if you've been listening or watching along with us, there's 3 of us here, Jonathan, Antonia, myself. We've had this conversation, and you're the 4th person in this conversation specifically. We want to hear from you. What's going on? What's coming up? As Jonathan's explaining some of these concepts, some of these experiences that he's had, how are you processing this on your side? How do you think about your own death and dying? Is it something you just try to ignore and push out of your head? Like a lot of people do that. Is it something you focus on? Do you have an intentionality to how you would like to die, or how you would like to complete your life? A lot of people I think sometimes people have a strong faith background, and I think they just think like, because I have a strong faith background, I'm not going to think about how I'll transition or complete my life here. But I think that was the one reason why I may not have had. So I'm curious to hear you, as you've been listening or watching, like, how do you think about this imminent moment that's coming for all of us? And maybe you've been through some experiences that we'd love to hear. So come over underneath personalityhacker.com, directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question, or more importantly, share your story, your perspective. What experiences have you had around this? And we want to hear from you and have your voice represented here too.
Yeah. Like a death. Like, I think I've thought about a will for things, possessions, etc., the material elements, and perhaps a will for funeral arrangements, right? And those are kindnesses to your loved ones.
Absolutely.
And also maybe part of that is my wishes and intentions for how I'd like to spend the end of it.
Yeah.
Like that's a piece of it, not just your material possessions and arrangements, but also how you'd like to experience the very end of it. I'm really going to give that some serious thought and attention. Thank you. And if you enjoyed this podcast, I mean, I hate to say, death, and now I'm going to pitch a bunch of stuff, but here we go.
You're not dead yet, so
and you're
come over and get a program.
I'm not dead yet, and you're not dead yet. So if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. That's how you can spend your moments, right? Or your minutes, whichever one it is for you. And by the way, thank you. We didn't do a proper thank you for coming on and talking.
Well, I was going to do it at the very, very end, but we're good here too.
Yeah. And then we can also have you sign off with us. But that said, if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating or review on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. You could be watching us on YouTube right now in a video podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, you can like it. And if you have time to set aside for your day, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and then hit the bell that lets you know when a new episode comes out. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it in all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Goodreads or on Amazon, that also helps us out a lot. And finally, if you'd like to go through a whole bunch of little mini deaths through transformation, right? That's one of the best pitches. Go check out our catalog of programs and see which one will help you die a little bit every day till it culminates to the big one. Is that a good pitch? Is that good marketing?
Marketing 101,
I don't know.
You pass. Perfect.
But if you'd like to know how to live a good life that is successful, here, I'll go that direction.
There you go.
Which is, did you do a good job? Well, your personality type might tell you how you define living a good life and having done a good job.
Yeah.
So head over to personalityhacker.com and grab the owner's manual that's right for your personality. And continue to live a good life, a successful life.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Now we can pour love on Jonathan. Thank you so much for being here. It's really great to have you on the show and talk about some of these ideas. There's a poetic, elegant way, I think, Antonia and I find you. Like we find you in this, you have poetic. This sage-like quality in how you speak.
Yeah.
That seasoning she's talking about. And I appreciate you bringing it here to the show and to the person that's with us here, watching and listening along. So much gratitude to you, Jonathan. Thank you.
You're welcome
for this. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
I'm Jonathan Hardin.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.